The Vatican is in financial trouble. We know this. We have speculated, you and I, as just laymen, have speculated publicly and privately that the financial woes of the Vatican have mostly to do with the laity being fed up, not putting our money in the collection plates anymore, especially not for special collections or anything else, only giving our money to our parish in a way that the money will stay in the parish, right? That's we speculate that that is, and that's definitely a key factor in this. There's another factor in all of this, and that's corruption. If you go back to the Cardinal Pell story, Cardinal Pell's troubles began when he started auditing the Vatican's finances. In fact, the mysterious transfer of money from Vatican City to Australia, that is definitely linked to the woes and the wrath of whoever that was brought down on Cardinal Pell, was indicative of that. And before him, it was Archbishop Vigano, whose troubles began when he began auditing the Vatican's finances. After Cardinal Pell, it was Cardinal Becciu who became the fall guy when all the problems and all the corruption there was made public. Money just disappears in the Vatican hierarchy. It just does. Whether it goes to cardinals, specific cardinals who take it illicitly, or laymen or secret projects, we don't really know what's going on. And on top of that, the Vatican engages in risky financial deals in the secular world. The funding of a movie about Elton John comes to mind, or London real estate deals, and all these other things. And if you go back and study the history of the crisis in the church post Vatican II, you'll see that this is a theme that was recurring. Malachi Martin's very important work that's overlooked by most readers of his, the book Vatican, details all of that, going back to the waning days of World War II, with the prologue, the very beginning of the book, being about 100 years before that, all the way to the 1980s. And you begin to see how all of this stuff fits together. This is a recurring theme. And so in our time, we get Pope Francis. And there's something ironic about this with Pope Francis, because he is the Pope of the poor, who calls for a church of the poor and often chastises people for financial irresponsibility and misusing the wealth given to us by God himself, and how we're supposed to use our wealth to help others and all the rest of it. It's a fine message. It really is. But there's something deeply ironic about that, or maybe poetic, about the person bearing that message, who is unable to control Vatican finances, and who is ultimately where the buck stops in Rome, and he is running the Vatican's ledger deep into the red. And that might be because he either doesn't know what he's doing, that he has got a post well above his competency level, or it might be because he has a habit of surrounding himself with men who are deeply corrupt and thus easy to control. This has been so well documented that it shouldn't bear repeating, but whenever priests from Argentina and South America more broadly, who are fairly well connected, find themselves wrapped up in the Ted McCarrick problem, oftentimes they get given a post in Rome. That's happened a lot of times. And it's happened with other types of men as well. He has this odd habit of keeping men of the James Martin persuasion near him, which is often thought to be because men like that are easy to control. Most people don't want to give voice to the other reason for that, and that is because he is thought to be a fellow traveler with them, just not someone who causes scandal with his behavior in that regard. I'll let you decide the truth of that or not. But that is the setup for what we're talking about today, because we're seeing a political power play now going on in the Vatican, and it has implications for the next conclave. So we're going to paint for you a picture here with these recent stories that have been in discussion, and very few people are pointing out how all this, the obvious way a lot of this fits together. The headline from cath.net, a sort of German version of LifeSite News, a little more moderate than LifeSite. The headline: significant deficit in Vatican pension fund, Pope sounds the alarm. The purpose of him sounding the alarm is to get Roman curial officials to spend less money, for them to raise more money for the Vatican, and for you, of course, the laity, to give a few extra dollars at Mass on Sunday. Now, the kind of people who watch these kind of videos either don't typically give to their diocesan normal collections. They find other ways to support their parish, and they find other ways to fulfill their tithing duties. They don't give to the typical collections for the most part. or so I've kind of deduced from reading my comment section and my emails. But Rome is in financial trouble, and Francis has done a lot of these kind of things to reform that. Case in point, you remember the Cardinal Burke story from, I think it was last April or May. Cardinal Burke had his Vatican apartments threatened to be taken from him. He lost the stipend that cardinals get, which was he used to pay for his apartment. A benefactor stepped forward and took care of it for him, but that was something Francis was threatening to do to people, and he was the first one, Cardinal Burke was, to have this done to him. It's all part of a bigger picture. Vatican needs money. This also has to do with the deal with Cardinal Zen's home country. It is thought that that government has given the Vatican a lot of money. But if it had given the Vatican a lot of money, unless the Vatican is deeply in financial trouble, on the verge of bankruptcy, then you would think that they wouldn't be having these problems, because the whispering about that kind of money is that it's in the billions of dollars amount. But if that was the case, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion this morning. Here are the details from Cath.net. Quote, the Vatican is in financial difficulties. In mid-September, the Pope addressed his leadership with a dramatic appeal for savings. On Thursday, a letter followed in which Francis expressed his concern about the Vatican pension system. We are faced with serious, complex problems that, quote, threaten to get worse if we do not address them in time, the Pope wrote to his College of Cardinals and the heads of the Vatican offices. The pension fund for employees shows a significant deficit that is trending upwards. In concrete terms, this means that the current system is not able to guarantee the fulfillment of the pension obligation for future generations in the medium term, Francis continued. Therefore, structural measures must be taken urgently to achieve the sustainability of the pension fund in the general context for the limited resources available to the entire organization and adequate pension coverage for current and future workers, from the point of view of justice and balance between the different generations. And here's where it gets weird. Here's where the power play comes in. Francis appointed the American Cardinal Kevin Farrell as the sole administrator of the pension fund. The 77-year-old heads the Vatican Committee for Investments, a financial control body, among other things. He's also the Camerlengo of Vatican City. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. The Pope justified the step with the need for a unified vision and called on all heads of the Curia to work together in a special way to facilitate this new and inevitable path of change. And of course, then it goes on, talks about how the Vatican is in an 80 million euro deficit last year. For American money, it's like 90 million, $95 million. That's not a small amount of money for the Vatican. And it's growing. And I suspect that the Vatican bureaucracy is also growing. Kevin Farrell's the interesting part about this. And I'm glad that a fair number of people have pointed out that it's odd that he's the one involved in this. But let's go to Info Vaticana, because there's some other factors here that are important to the story. Let's go to this headline from Info Vaticana: Global morality and internal chaos. Pope faces Vatican financial collapse. Collapse is a strong word. But you would not see this kind of scrambling if things were just a little bit problematic financially. They have long since passed the phase of things being a little problematic. When you take the broader picture, the threats to cardinals made, being told that they need to start paying their own rent out of their own finances, that their stipends might be cut, and Cardinal Burke being made the example of, maybe even some of these bishops being forced into retirement and new ones being appointed who will promise to give more money. I mean, a lot of these things, a lot of these pieces fit together into a larger picture. And it paints you a picture of a Vatican that is in deep trouble. And this subject will absolutely be discussed behind closed doors at the next conclave that gives us Francis's successor, whenever that happens. Whether that happens in 2025, which I kind of doubt, or in 2028, more likely. Whenever that happens, if this situation is not resolved, it's going to be a subject of discussion. And any improvements that Cardinal Farrell makes in this, which is key, will have great weight at that conclave. Not that I expect he will be the man running, a candidate for the Pope, but his influence cannot be understated. But here's some details. The Vatican Pension Fund, the institution created to guarantee the livelihood of those who have dedicated their lives to the service of the Holy See, is in the red. This is nothing new. Reports have been pointing out its structural imbalance for years. However, Pope Francis has decided that now is the time to sound the alarm. Why now? Because perhaps because the problem can no longer be swept under the carpet of Vatican finances. Meanwhile, the Vatican continues to throw millions at pastoral projects of dubious utility. From the pavilion of the Dubai Expo to international conferences where the thermometer problem is discussed more than the salvation of souls. And the Vatican workers, they should pray because their pensions are in danger. The Pope has appointed Cardinal Kevin Farrell as the sole trustee of the pension fund, a move that Francis says is an essential step towards sustainability. But this comes too late and leaves a bitter taste. What kind of moral master spends millions on political and propaganda initiatives while his own house is falling apart? Think of the Vatican's new Luce art thing. Whatever else you might think of that, why? Right? How much money did they spend on that? Or even if you really are partial to Luce and don't like it being questioned, how about this one? The Synod on Synodality. How many millions upon millions of euros and dollars were spent on a synod about talking and changing processes and inverting the hierarchy? How much money was spent on that? We'll never know. This side of the judgment, we will never know how much money was spent on this. The Pope, who calls on countries to open their doors to all the people who want to be there, who insists on welcoming them as an inescapable moral duty, now asks Vatican employees for sacrifice and generosity to ensure their future livelihood. Is this the same Pope who preaches about social justice and the rights of people who work? The contradiction cries out to heaven. And then he talks about how all the moral scandals I talked about at the beginning. Does the Vatican need to cut its spending? I don't think so. I don't think this is a spending problem. This is a problem of the character of the men who are given access to the finances. Again, I know for a fact Archbishop Vigano, when he was auditing the Vatican books, that he found millions of euros hidden away in hidden funds and hidden line items and things. He found millions of euros like that being misused. So did Cardinal Pell. I'm betting Cardinal Becciu did too. And that's why they chose to get rid of him the way they did, because they can't keep doing the same thing to different people. So why was Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the American, given control of the pension fund? Cardinal Farrell is not going to be Pope. He is entirely too old for that. He's the Camerlengo of Vatican City. He is the man responsible for governing the Vatican City state on behalf of Pope Francis, which may be fairly symbolic at this stage of things, but that post becomes especially important in the event of a conclave. When Francis goes to his judgment, suddenly the Camerlengo becomes extraordinarily important because the Camerlengo has the controls of the Vatican purse strings, at least on the pension fund, which is a high-profile issue near and dear to the hearts of every employee in Vatican City, as well as to the cardinals and others. This could be a sign that Francis thinks a conclave is coming relatively soon. Cardinal Farrell is 77. He will age out of that post in probably 2027, unless Francis elects to keep him there, which is entirely his right to do. Something to remember. The Camerlengo, as the governor of Vatican City, controls most of the functions of Vatican City, including access to buildings for people to meet, for the various factions to meet at the conclave, for them to discuss their nominees or whatever behind closed doors, and the rest of the things that go into the conclave. And not to get a little Game of Thrones here with you, but without a doubt, the Camerlengo also has a lot of the little birds that will listen in and report information surreptitiously to him. In a conclave, the Camerlengo can tip the scales of the outcome by controlling access to information and also now access to money, because access to the pension fund means he has access to money. Plus, if he actually does reform the financial situation, or at least makes noticeable progress on fixing the issue, he can lend his credibility as the de facto person running Vatican City to the candidate of his choice at the conclave. That is important. Power politics, I think, is key to this, and not many people are mentioning this. There's also another thing to look at here, and this is where we go to Phil Lawler. See, Phil Lawler published this on CatholicCulture.org with this headline: The Curious Background of the Pope's Fixer. Cardinal Farrell has been given the unenviable task of fixing a very important and bad situation in Vatican City, something that desperately needs the attention of somebody in a position of authority to address the wrongs of the financial situation. In a more nuts and bolts framing of this, there are a lot of normal Catholics who show up to work, who live in Rome and show up to work in Vatican City every day. They do their job on behalf of the church. They take their job very seriously because they're working for the church, and whose pension, whose retirement hangs in the balance if this isn't resolved. The church, you would think, has the same duty to them as any other employer has to anybody else to take care of those who have dedicated their life to serving them. So the logic goes in the modern world. So why Kevin Farrell? Let's let Phil Lawler explain this. Quote, with a curious appointment this week, Pope Francis has shown how much he trusts an American prelate who is now one of the most powerful men at the Vatican. What was that appointment? Which to date has escaped public notice? And why has the pontiff placed so much confidence and so much power in Cardinal Kevin Farrell? Yesterday, the Pope announced the Vatican's underfunded pension account, long a source of concern, had become an urgent problem that can no longer be postponed. So he named Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the prefect for the Dicastery of Laity, Family, and Life, as well as the Camerlengo, as the sole administrator of the pension fund, with authority to take the steps necessary to correct a serious perspective imbalance. In his announcement, the Pope indicated that experts had already studied the problems, so presumably the professional money managers have made their recommendations. Inevitably, those steps will be painful, cutting benefits somewhere and or raising levies somewhere else. Now, Cardinal Farrell has the mandate to carry out the plan, along with the authority as sole administrator, to tailor it to fit the particular circumstances. Cardinal Farrell already has considerable clout in the Vatican financial affairs. As Catholic World News reported yesterday, quote, 2019, the pontiff appointed him as the Camerlengo, the official who supervises the material goods of the Holy See during a papal interregnum. That's the period between when a pope passes away, or I guess resigns, and the conclave meets to give us the new pope. In 2020, he was named president of the Pontifical Commission on Confidential Matters, and in 2022, he became the president of the Pontifical Commission on Investments. You begin to see how powerful of a figure Cardinal Kevin Farrell is in the Roman Curia. Vatican secrets, investments, finances. Whenever the discussion turns to these matters, with their obvious potential for corruption, one now finds Cardinal Kevin Farrell at the head of the table. I'm going to pause here. He goes on in this to describe him as kind of the man who gets his hands dirty to fix issues for him. I'm going to skip down because there are two kinds of men you want to have do that for you in an organization. Men of unimpeachable moral and virtue and character. Men you can trust with anything. Or men who know corruption all too well. Not because they have spent their lives dedicated to rooting it out wherever they've been, but because they're fellow travelers in it. Back to the article, quote. Again, I will quote from Catholic World News report. Born in Ireland, the future cardinal was ordained a priest of the Legionnaires of Christ in 1978. That's Maciel. In 1984, he left the Legionnaires to become a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., where he rose to become Vicar General, serving under then Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Became roommates with Cardinal McCarrick, by the way. He was named Bishop of Dallas in 2007, then appointed to his current post in the Roman Curia by Pope Francis in 2016, and raised to the College of Cardinals soon thereafter. Two factors stand out in the thumbnail resume. The future cardinal was a prominent member of a religious order marked by serious scandal, to put it mildly. Then he became the right-hand man of a prelate who provoked an even graver scandal. It is curious, isn't it, that he now holds multiple posts at the Vatican that could provide grist for scandal mongers. Father Farrell's departure from Legionnaires of Christ was explained as a consequence of philosophical differences. Although he was a prominent member of the group, there is no evidence that he had been aware that its founder, the late Maciel, was raking off funds to support a double life, subsidizing the secretive relationships with ladies and the offspring therein. Apparently he, like many others, failed to see any hints of impropriety. And by the way, that's only like half of the evil that Maciel did. That's actually the light stuff. The rest you can't even say on any of these platforms. Maciel was one of the great villains in the post-conciliar era, to the point where he might be he might actually be worse than McCarrick. And that is not to downplay anything that anybody who was harmed by McCarrick experienced at his hands. Maciel is one of those names who has become like synonymous with Judas, synonymous with Lucifer in the world. Then Farrell, moved to Washington and became a close aide to then Cardinal McCarrick in 2018 when the truth about McCarrick's serial bad things finally became public. Now, Cardinal Farrell, who had lived in the same household as McCarrick, remember, roommates, announced that he was shocked by the revelations, even though the stories about McCarrick's beach house escapades had circulated widely for their ecclesiastical rumor mill for more than 20 years. He was shocked at the things that his roommate did, the kinds of things that you would only do behind closed doors, like, say, at home, where your roommate is. I don't believe him when he says he was shocked. And when you see the video clip of him saying that, he's not exactly the best actor. No one's ever going to give him an Oscar for that performance. Again, there's no evidence that Cardinal Farrell did have solid evidence of McCarrick's bad things, but this time it would have been more remarkable that he failed to pick up on the clues. As Michael Brendan Doherty wrote at the National Review, what a life to have been twice put in the best place to know that at that level everyone knows, and yet to have known nothing. Because literally everybody in Rome and in the church in America knew about Cardinal McCarrick. It's just that most of them were afraid of him. Cardinal McCarrick, as James Grine reminds us, traveled with wads of cash internationally, gave them to politicians. He rubbed shoulders with politicians. He had personal audiences with every pope from the time before he was even a cardinal. He raised mountains of money for the papacy. He knew people. He knew their secrets. Maybe he helped facilitate the creation of some of those secrets, if you catch my meaning. So why was this man, Cardinal Farrell, made the one who was the Camerlengo, the one who will govern Vatican City, essentially, especially during the interregnum, as well as involved in some of those other very important things about keeping essentially sensitive issues on the down low, to use a colloquial term. Why was he made the one going after the pension funds? He is going to be the one who facilitates a lot of the next conclave, informally. Do not underestimate his power or the role he will play in maintaining or trying to maintain the Bergoglian rule after Francis is gone. Francis has appointed 80% of the men who will choose the next pope, counting the men who next week or the week thereafter are going to be elevated to the College of Cardinals. Now, there's no guarantee that they will choose another Francis, but it seems likely. And with all the power Cardinal Farrell has, he can help facilitate things in a certain direction, giving things a gentle nudge. And because it's all behind closed doors, and because the goings-on of conclaves are the people who participate are sworn to secrecy, and laity and even priests and things almost never get behind through those doors at the actual conclave where all the action happens, we will never know. That's Cardinal Farrell, in charge of fixing the Vatican's rather hot-button financial issue of the day. I don't think this has much to do that much with fixing money. Curious what you have to think about this, though. So let me know. I'm going to check here in the live comments here. Traditionalist Catholic says, wouldn't put past McCarrick to run honeypot operations to... Yeah, these days, probably not. Reportedly, McCarrick is in no condition to even stand before court for the things that he did. But beforehand, yeah, no, I absolutely think he was probably involved in that stuff. Without it seems more likely that he was than he was not. Is it possible the process whereby the next vicar is chosen becomes invalid? You mean the next pope? Yes. John Paul II issued a canonically, legally binding document that says if you engage in politics at the conclave, meaning lobbying, and you try to work the system to make sure that you have a candidate chosen ahead of time and all those things, that it invalidates the conclave. Binding by canon law, never repealed after John Paul II. And here's a little grist for the mill for people who do not believe Francis is a legitimate pope. Cardinal Daniels, one of the most key figures in that period of church history up until when he passed away a couple of years ago, in 2015, I want to say it was, stood at a microphone at a podium with a camera on him, admitting that they violated that completely when they got Francis made pope. Admitted it. How legally binding that is, I don't know. I leave that for the theologians. But that is one of those things frequently cited by people who do not believe Francis is legitimately the Roman pontiff. Catholic Arrow says Judas didn't even get to spend his blood money. That's true. He did not. In fact, he tried to give it back once he realized. Let's take a look furthermore. Holy Mother Church can never perish. She will not. No, she will be here till the end of time. We have our Lord's promise on that. But yeah, so Chesterton's Justice Francis is a shepherd in the full sense, but one who believes that the fences of doctrine might hinder the wandering sheep. He tends to prefer the open pasture over the safety of the fold. Right, and you using the handle Chesterton's Jest, remember the parable that G.K. Chesterton famously told about why walls exist. Okay, so remember what Chesterton said about why walls exist. I can't quote it explicitly off the top of my head, but basically it goes like this. Everybody wonders why there's walls, why the playground has walls around it. And so some enterprising individual decides to remove the walls surrounding the playground. And what happens? They see on the other side of where those walls stood was a cliff. They exist for a reason. All right, folks. So any final thoughts on all this in the comments? Get them in now. Please pray for Cardinal Farrell. Again, I don't believe he didn't know about Uncle Ted. I don't believe him. Nobody really believes him, I don't think. And the fact that he's the one who has all of the power now in Rome in terms of a lot of like the intangible power, the great power he has in Rome, if exercised correctly, is concerning because he is without question a protege of Ted McCarrick. All right, folks, thanks very much for tuning in. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.